Hello and welcome to Print Soft Cover, and it's my privilege to talk about this fascinating book, which is out today, 100 Reflections on Harappan Civilization, Ahimsa, by best-selling author Mr. Devdutt Pattanaik. He needs no introduction, and all of those who follow his work know that he has written over about, I think, more than 1,000 columns. I don't know, about over 50 books. In the decade spanning since I think 1996. So thank you so much for joining us. And this is a very interesting book. I started reading this book, and I initially, when I read the introduction and the cover of the book, I had a lot of thoughts in my mind because of the field archaeologist, and working on Harappan civilization. As you talk about it in your book, archaeologists having a certain notion. I thought, what this book is going to be about, 100 reflections. But as I was digging into the book, I was going through page by page. You are talking about 100 aspects of Harappan civilization, which are often spoken in a very casual way. But what you are actually doing is giving us an alternative point of view. That's what the book, really was very fascinating to me, because we are often driving on the same road, driving on the same path. We don't usually diverge from the path that we are on, led by our predecessors. So, to you, my first question is, what was basically the inspiration for the book? How did you come across this idea? Because, on Harappan civilization, and that too, Ahimsa as the core topic.
Um, so, I have been fascinated by Harappa for a long time, and I'd done the illustrations a long time ago. In fact, one day, on a fit of inspiration, because I was looking at all the seals, I got inspired and I started drawing. Because you see, when you draw it, you sort of ideas get very clear what exactly it is. And what struck me is the uh, precision with which the animals were drawn. They were
Hmm.
not symbolic, they were almost realistic. They were trying to make them very real, the hooves, the claws. So it was quite, and for the size it is so small that I was quite surprised they had achieved that. And while doing this, I was thinking about Harappa, and I never thought I would write a book, but I was interested in the mythology of Harappa, not the archaeology, not the history, nothing of that sort. I study mythology, and I said, if this is a place where I don't have any texts, I don't have any stories, we know nothing other than the art and architecture. And I have always maintained that people's mythology manifest in art, architecture also. So this was the only place I got to go in the reverse direction. Just look at art and architecture and try to figure out, how did they imagine the world? Archaeologists nowadays use the word ideology or ideology. I stick to the word mythology because I think people are embarrassed by the word mythology, but I am not. And I have seen people use this word, some of the senior archaeologists in their talks, but I think they miss a lot because they've not studied mythology. It's as simple as that. And I wanted to bring it to make them aware that there is other ways of thinking and looking at the same pieces of data. I don't know it's right or wrong, but I think speculation is a good place to begin for scholars to look at it, think differently. And as you said, when you're walking in one path, you need someone to tell, why don't you look this way? Why don't you look that way?
Yeah, true. Because as I was like, the first in the introduction and the part where you're talking about mythology, you talk about the structure of Harappan civilization. You've presented ideas which were like put forth by John Marshall, with the terms like the priest king. I absolutely do not like that term myself. Even the term dancing girl, I've written a paper on it as to why we should not call it a dancing girl. But one of the things that struck to me, what you said, as to when I was writing that paper, and when even we have this discussion, amongst ourselves, we asked what is the alternative, right? And what Marshall and other early archaeologists were saying, that there's a priesthood perhaps, and that is what is heading this organization. And you spend a lot of time, I think, talking about, and you give an alternative point of view, and I want you to say it. I don't want to spill the beans. You spend a lot of time talking about an alternative point of view of how the structure would have been. You found links to mythology, found links to literature as well. So if you could tell about that, like, that is a very fascinating idea for me as well.
So, see, the purpose of mythology, when you want to control a group of people, you only have two tools in this world. One is
Yeah,
violence. So, you use a very
yeah,
violent way of getting people to do what you want.
yeah,
The other is storytelling. You tell them a story, and so they're internally motivated to work. And when people saw the pyramids, they at first believed this has to be done through violent activities, beating up people, because that's the biblical narrative of slavery and people being beaten to build these gigantic structures. Now, the Egyptian pyramids are contemporary with the Harappan cities.
yeah,
And but what you do find is the Egyptian cities, now scholars have figured out that it was really people were voluntarily coming and working in these structures for various reasons, some clear, some not clear, and they would get bread and beer to work for the pyramid. And there is this lots of work done on that department. The slavery thesis has been completely rejected.
mm,
Although the Egyptians were a very violent people, we have steles which show the king brutally massacring people, and there's a lot of violence in the imagery. Now you come to Harappa and you find these cities, unbelievable precision, unbelievable standardization, modularity,
yeah,
absence of monumental architecture. And I'm like, okay. And everybody talks about the absence of violence, relative absence of violence. For me, what is interesting is no image, no clay tablet showed violent scenes. There were a lot of they were aware of violence. They're talking about buffaloes or bisons fighting each other. They showed
yeah,
there is images of domination, which means they are
yeah,
talking about power. So they're
yeah,
familiar with power, but you see, whenever a human being has a weapon, he's fighting an animal. If two human beings are fighting, there's someone in standing between them, and everybody
mhm,
would say they're fighting over the woman. So they would never see that as a woman separating two fighting people. And I'm like, I was a little, because it's such a small piece of art. How do you know who is doing what? But so I
yeah,
was like looking at that, and I was saying that is it possible that they had somehow figured out storytelling as a tool to harness the human resources?
yeah,
So that was the first thesis, storytelling. But which story are they telling to
yeah,
get people to be motivated? The second came from a paper which was written in the 1990s. I'm not very good with the names of the archaeologists, but there was this paper. I've referred to the paper, which said that what is unique about Harappa is the absence of hordes. The hordes, very few hordes are found. They are found in some places, but unlike, relative to, not complete absence, of course, but relative to Mesopotamia, relative to Egypt, the hordes are in peripheries and not in the center. The center place is almost very stark, and he uses various ways and techniques to say that it is almost as if these peoples, the power center lacks accumulation of wealth, but is almost the opposite. Now, this sounds like a very fanciful sentence, but
mm,
it struck me that this is exactly how Buddhist monasteries function. This is how Jain gurus would have functioned. The fact that the Jain community in India, which is the one of the most richest community, the most successful trading communities, worships or venerates people who own nothing, Digambara, is something that the West is not familiar with.
mm,
Buddhist, now people know that the Buddhist, everybody talks of Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, and everybody talks of Buddha as someone who has given up the world. But we know that the Buddhist monasteries were built by merchants, and the
yeah,
monasteries served as for many purposes. There were lots of things. They were bankers, they were traders, they were universities, they were doctors, they perhaps even did networking. So lots of things were happening. And I said, hey, and they also had all the mercantile had rivers, and they would go by sea, fluvial civilizations and coastal civilizations. And that's exactly what Harappa is. Fluvial, there is the river Sindhu, there is the coastal area. And I'm like, is it possible these relatively non-violent people, hence Ahimsa, had a story which sort of made them do business? They were capitalists, they were doing money, they were trading,
yeah,
but somehow the highest position in their offices was not given to someone with wealth, but someone with the courage to walk away from wealth. Like a senior, it's like Nowadays we talk about post-retirement benefits and we say that's not healthy,
Yeah.
right? We say it's unhealthy for a society because once you retire, you have to become a mentor for the next generation.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Harappa is talking. I'm proposing. I mean, it's very difficult to prove these things. But I'm saying that
Yeah.
the fact that they are making a lot of money, they are trading, they have wealth, but they're very gated communities. They are gated communities of gates. They're controlling movements of people, so they're highly regulated society. And there's no hoarding happening at the center of power. The citadel, the so-called citadel, Acropolis. I mean, you're using feudal words, Acropolis, using Greek
Yeah. Yeah.
words,
Talk
and I'm
about
like,
that. Yeah.
yes, the language. I'm like, that's because you see, a young archaeologist is learning these words, and
Yeah.
these words are shaping his mind. Citadel is
Yeah.
feudal, Acropolis is Greek democratic structure, blocks is an American idea. We are not using Indian words or anything but Western words. We're not using Chinese words also. We're not using Japanese words. We're only using European words. We're only using American words. And I saw the people who were working on it, and you have a large number of Indians working on it, and you have a large number of people from other parts of the world, mostly Europeans and Americans working on it.
Yeah.
And a few Japanese. I saw a few Japanese papers
Yeah.
also written,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I saw how the Japanese professors would talk differently, the Americans would talk differently, the Europeans would talk differently, and the
Yeah.
Indians would talk differently.
Yeah.
And this made me think, hey, maybe there is something missing. And that's how I came up with the thesis of the merchant, mercantile monastic models, which is there in
Mhm.
Jainism, Buddhism, and in many temples of India also. Merchant as well as the monk. They sort of
Yeah.
form group in some interesting, because the monk sort of regulates greed,
Yeah.
regulates things going wrong.
Yeah. You also talk about, slightly, but I would like you to talk about the difference between monk and the priesthood. How, because Marshall has this figurine, this small stay-at figurine, which he termed as the priest king. In one of the chapters also you've titled, I think, neither a priest nor a king, something like that, because it's true,
Yes.
whether it's a priest or a king, we don't know. And there you have this monkhood theory. To me, it was very interesting because it's a very fresh alternative perspective. But I want you to tell why you think that, why you are against, or maybe not pro priesthood or
See, when you
priest.
see a male idol, you
Yeah,
think of positions of authority. And traditional society ka authority would be a king, a warlord, a priest. But the moment you see a woman's image, you think of dancing girl.
dancing girl. Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah,
the sexism is so obvious.
yeah,
We are projecting 20th century sexism
yeah,
onto something 4,500 years old. Right? So that was the first thing that struck me, is that this is a man who sees a man and assumes he's in a position of authority. We don't think of him as a slave,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So the first thing is, maybe he's a dancer. Can a dancer dress like this? Or no, that is not the way dancers dress. How do you know how Harappan dancers dressed?
yeah.
And the fact that the figurine now, he didn't know this, but now we have found similar figurines in Central Asia. We have found
Yeah,
them in, I think, Helmand Plateau. So we have found them on the other side of the Hindu Kush. And there is a very strong thesis again that it is in the latter part of the mature phase, which is called, or the later part, when this priest king appears, then probably is not a local. That's one thesis which has emerged, that he's probably from some other place. And the image is smashed and broken in a very violent way. And people have noticed it's almost as if an anti-iconoclastic, I mean, there's an iconoclastic, sorry,
Hmm.
act. I think Dr. Bisht spoke about it in one of his lectures, that it's something to be noticed. I think Dholavira also has a similar statue sitting in a particular
Yeah,
position.
yeah,
So I was like, maybe he's a powerful person. Maybe he's a merchant prince. Maybe he's a rich capitalist. Maybe he is, we don't know what he is. So can we look at him differently? What is this person? Is he a local? Is he a foreigner? And those are the questions that, for me, what was interesting is the mark on his head.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because I had gone to Turkey, and we now know of the Turkish eye, the Turkish eye, which is, if you look carefully, the colors are, it is white, black, turquoise blue, and lapis lazuli blue. And
Yeah,
out of all these four things can be exported out of Harappa. because you have
Mhm.
got lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, you have turquoise from Iran, you have shell from the Arabian coast, and you have black steatite, which is coming. And you suddenly realize that, and we were good at inlay work, and this is is it a nazar thing? So nazar nikalne do, nazar nikalne ke liye, who will it be? Now, a monk is someone who shuns ownership. So
Yeah.
this man is not definitely a monk, and he doesn't want. And if you know the early Buddhist images, Buddha is not shown in form. He was never
Yeah.
shown, right?
Anthropomorphic. Yeah.
Anthropomorphic was never there, and it comes much later. So I'm
Much
asking
later.
myself, can a proto monastic order exist at that time? Because we don't have any information. But why have we not considered it? It is important to consider it, that there is a monastic, and I think there's a suggestion by scholars on the fact that the unicorn is found in 80% of the seals, and that one horn for me reminded me of a Buddhist poem which talks of a monk should be as solitary as the single horn of the beast. Now people think the
Yeah.
single horn referred to, that's a very famous Buddhist old Buddhist poetry, but people assume it refers to the rhinoceros, and I'm
Mhm.
saying maybe they were talking of the unicorn. And
Yeah.
that's the idea which came up. So these kind of many little things come. And I'm, again, as I said, I'm very clear this is a reflection. I'm not an
Yeah.
archaeologist. I want people to expand their mind, think differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. You also talk about the Pashupati seal, where you are, you've sort of, talking about the animals and symbolism. You've spent a lot of time in a book talking about them. You have also connected them to, again, Jainism, Buddhism. You're talking about how the animals are representative in different ecological zones, and then you speak about the Pashupati seals and different animals on it and the basic symbolism. I'll come back to unicorn again because that is where the perspective is quite interesting. You've again spent some time on unicorn here, but let's just talk about the symbolism and the animals.
Yes.
Jonathan Mark Kennard has written a very interesting paper on animals long back. And I think that was the only time where archaeologists were in. He tried to talk about the symbolism, of course, from an archaeologist point of view. There's then again another book called The Archetypical Mother Goddess, which sort of puts two and two on symbolism. But you've spent a lot of time on understanding or having your own perspective of symbolism. How do you see the animals and the Harappans? Because they had a very close relationship.
So first is, whenever people use the word mother goddess, I always check if they use the word father god. If they don't use the word father god, then it's a sexist comment, because it is again reducing the goddess to a mother, and a
Yeah.
biological function and a social function is being attributed to the god. So one has to, as a mythologist, you have to be very careful language, the use of language, how it is used, because language is a social construct. Mythology is a social construct, not the woke, very primitive understanding of social constructs. Now the universities are using this word, and I'm like, social construct is mythology, there's nothing complicated about it. But then, white people always know better than everybody else. So but the point is, the animals, what is the first thing that strikes you when you look at the Harappan seals, which I was like, you jumped to Pashupati, the word
Yeah.
Pashupati, and because everybody assumes it's Shiva and people say Shiva was worshipped. I'm like, wait, don't jump so fast, because Shiva iconography never shows him with a horn. So step one,
Yeah.
where the horned Shiva? Show it to me. The position is, of course, looks Vedic, yogic, and they're
Yeah.
sitting on a pidha. A pidha is a low stool, which is typically Indian. You don't find,
Yeah. It's right. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you. So, but the animals were interesting because the Pashupati traditionally means cattle, cows,
Hmm.
cattle. And there's no not even a zebu bull on this image. So first of all, there is no zebu bull, and the animals are exactly the animals that appear on Harappan seals. There is the elephant, there is the rhinoceros, there is the tiger, there is the buffalo, there is not. We're not sure whether it's a deer, or I think it is probably an ibex, with a wild mountain goat.
Hmm.
Um, they're all wild animals. None of them are domesticated. We are not sure whether elephants were domesticated. Just a thesis right now. We don't have to prove it. So wild animals, clan animals are appearing on every side. And for me, this was a sign that these are clan images appearing in a man who is the center, who is probably leader, regulator, priest, and they're all coming together, and he's bringing them in a collaborative ecosystem, is the first thing that struck.
Mm.
And that is what hit me. I'm like, Pashupati, you're trying to make it religious because it's India. Indians have to be religious. We cannot have an economic or a political viewpoint because, Indians are yoga practitioners, and that shows the Western bias again. We refuse to see Indians as human beings. We are like these exotic creatures with gurujis everywhere. And that's very insulting, because it sort of doesn't make you an equal, where these are people with politics, economics, philosophy, art, culture, gender, sexuality, all that comes together. So the seal has to be seen in so many different ways. And those,
True.
I said, if I was a Jain's archaeologist, the first thing I would say, ye to Jain Tirthankar ke lakshan hai. And the first thing is the Jain Tirthankar Lakshan. If in John Marshall was educated in Jainism, he would have also said this, but he didn't, because he's not educated in Jainism. So what you know shapes your opinions. Your opinions is a function of your knowledge. And therefore, we should understand that every archaeologist comes with their function of knowledge, and they have to all. I believe they should write a disclaimer. I come from this school of thought, so that we know that they come from this school of thought, and we are all bigoted, we all have prejudices, we all have biases, which is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's true because see now, like I belong to a generation which is, after John Marshall, there have been a lot of archaeologists which have followed the same line of thought, and now I belong to a generation where most of us, we are relying on science and technology because that's the only way to go about it. Competing the archaeology around the world, we rarely talk about these things. I remember when I presented a paper on Dancing Girl, and my perspective was that it's very patriarchal to call it a dancing girl or a nautch girl, because in 1920s, when Marshall has seen that figurine, being unearthed, and it's a nude. It's a girl with no top. That's what he immediately thought, that that sanskari, non-sanskari, that patriarchal mindset have come to play. But then we do find the remains of Dancing Girl. There is a Birana potsherd which has the same outline, a graffiti of the Dancing Girl. Then there is an unfinished Dancing Girl in
Yeah,
museum, I think, in Pakistan.
Pakistan.
And so it really it shows that there is some importance attached to that figurine. Perhaps what it is we don't know, and same goes with Pashupati and other, the priest king and all of that. And I remember this, in which you're talking about the Tirthankars and how
The
animal
Naksha. Yeah.
symbolism. There are so many animals, and this changes region to region. And you've spoken about this in this book as well, that how the animals have changed from region to region, from Indus to the Saraswati Ghaggar, that
Yes.
entire region, the whole ecology changes. So the importance of a certain animal changes. You will not find bull in Indus in
Yeah.
that number. Yeah,
I'll
sorry.
give you an example of this. I'll give you an example. In Oman, they have found the Indus seal. That's a very famous
Yeah,
discovery, the
yeah,
Magan space and all that.
yeah.
And they find this round, they're round, and they have the bison, the gaur, the wild bison, most probably the gaur. Now, why would they use only that image? Is the question in my head. It was in my head. And I was like, क्यों है ये bison? Why not any other animal? Why have they chosen the bison? And
Yeah,
then, in mythology, you always check the fertility cycles of animals. And you
yeah.
realize that the cattle, that is wild buffaloes, which means also wild bisons, they they produce babies at the beginning of the monsoon and they mate at the end of the monsoon. So it is
Okay,
mapped to the monsoon. Their fertility cycle is mapped to the monsoon.
okay.
And how do you travel to Oman? One of the theses is that, did these people figure out the monsoon? Because how did they cross over? And is it
Yeah.
possible? Because it takes about 48 hours to travel across. And could it be that they had discovered the sail? We are not sure of it, but I think there's a papers scholars have written
Yeah.
about that. There's a suggestion that they probably knew at least that stretch. Those people knew the secret of crossing across. And therefore, the symbol of the Gaur bison, because monsoon winds were represented by this wild cattle.
Hmm.
Perhaps I want people to think. I'm not saying it is the truth. As I said,
Yeah.
I don't know. Mythology is speculative, but you
Yeah.
give a way ideas and you make people think, because there's a framework in which symbols appear. They're not random. In mythology, symbols are not random. The fact that all animals are wild, domestic animals are never represented in art, is something which there's no goat, there is no cow, there is no they're always wild animals. They are, and they're restricted. They're not many animals. They, even the crocodile, the fish, these are wild animals. They cannot
Yeah.
be.
Bull
These are
is though in art. Bull and
oh,
buffalo.
bull. That's a very interesting thing. Very good question. Because see, the bull is not domesticated. The cow is domesticated. The ox is domesticated because you
Yeah.
castrate. The
Yeah.
actual, if you go outside and see a bull, they're very scary creatures. You
Very,
go
very
to,
scary. Yeah.
they are very dangerous animals because they can,
Yes.
and there is no food tray ever kept in front of a bull. It is not
Mhm.
domesticated. They're trying
Yeah.
to put food trays in front of rhinos, but or a gaur also, but they're never putting a food tray in front of the bull. It's almost as if there is some that food looking tray. We're not sure what it is, but probably food tray. The head is not lowered, the head is always up. These are things to notice. It's
Yeah.
defiance, it's this bull, this alpha, this power. So power is very clearly seen and regulated in the artwork of the
Yeah.
Harappans. They understood power, they understood money, they understood trade, they understood logistics, they understood finance, and they're
They were
talking about trade
geographers. They
and
understood
dancing.
landscape. They understood everything. Like recently, two papers on Lothal were published, and those papers tell us how well they knew the landscape. They knew when, how to use a particular landscape, and that's the reason why Lothal was a very important connection in the maritime trade. It's quite fascinating, and also with the bull and the buffalo. Like when we were excavating Rakhi Gadi, we would find a lot of buffalo, and if you look at the present day region
Yes,
of the Haryana, you have a lot of buffalo, the Murrah buffalo,
yes.
and the horns are very different than the
Yeah,
other buffalo. They're curved. And in the figurines too, they have the curved
yeah.
horns. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
and I have excavated another site which is in Rajasthan, which is in Thar, and there the animal figurines, the variety that we get is a little different. You have more bull, and bull is found in large number, and even that's what the perspective of bull being the symbol of power and etc. comes in. And you also talk about the sacrifice and the fertility which is linked to it, and then I'll come to unicorn because I want you to talk a bit about unicorn. It's quite fascinating because we don't find this alternative to unicorn. You also talk about fertility, sacrifice, how there's no human sacrifice, or there is no like as opposed to the contemporary civilizations, you have this act of violence, but you don't
Yes.
have this in an open context. And there are two instances you've interpreted where archaeologists have said that two animals are attacking humans, but your perspective is actually the stopping the attack, or even the humans is a two sword which are so
Yeah,
that's quite a
this
good
so
perspective.
this is the cover image also. These are my, I didn't want to use the original images. I just wanted to reimagine those images and show them.
Yeah.
And it's not very clear what their genders are. They're probably male because of the hairdo. The hairdo looks male,
Yeah.
but the bangles in the arm, I'm like, is it a male? Is it a female? Is it a androgynous person? What is it? And why? And
Yeah.
this is separation of violence. I don't see such an image anywhere. This is Sugriv and Vali like fighting, but somebody separating them. And that is so, I mean, it's a possibility, right? That and a trading community traditionally in India, where does the knowledge idea of non-violence come from? They came from mercantile communities.
Yeah.
Buddhists and Jains kept talking because they said, ladai mat karo, business karo. You give me so trading is an alternative to raiding. Raiding is a classical thing seen with, raiding is violent, trading is non-violent. And that is something that any mythologist will understand. That why is Buddhism and Jainism always talks of ahimsa? It's because it is good for trade. Because if there's a war, business will collapse, markets will collapse. If you're not fair in a relationship, violence will happen. So you have to keep a business fair, and that's a long topic by itself. But there is an economic reason for ahimsa. It
Yeah.
is not so spiritual. See, that's the thing. Once you start looking at Indians as spiritual people, you see only priests and kings, kshatriyas, brahmanas, and then you're seeing women as objects of entertainment, therefore dancing and trivializing it by calling it a girl, and seeing nudity as something for male gaze. But nudity is not a big deal in many communities. What we
Mm.
consider nude is, so these gays, and these are new ideas, right? In 1920s, he didn't think of these words, but today we are familiar that a naked woman doesn't mean anything because we don't know what they thought was nudity, what they
Yeah.
assumed was nudity.
Yeah.
The Egyptian pharaohs have these big wooden beards. Hatshepsut was a woman who controlled, and she had a wooden beard placed over her. So you have these different ideas of gender, sexuality. There are no romantic images in Harappa. I didn't
Yeah.
find a single
Yeah.
romantic image. So, nobody has commented on it. Nobody has
Yeah.
commented on the absence. What is not present? Violence
Yeah.
is not present. Sex is also not present. And what the two images of sex which are suggestive of sex are very rather violative. Like there's a bull over a woman. There are
Yeah.
two scorpions. Um, it's not a healthy, happy, romantic image. I mean, if that is sexual, but we don't know. So fertility comes there. So when you talk about fertility, you're talking about also romance, not just baby production. So they are,
Yeah.
again, male perspective, baby production. They
Yeah.
are not seeing it as, so you have to think differently. And I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, it's very important actually to ask these questions, especially now coming to the unicorn, because you've spoken about unicorn, and we usually don't find that alternative perspective to unicorn. It's just been told to us, taught to us that look, this is with one horn, it's a unicorn, and if you remove the horn, the body looks like that of a cattle at times or of a horse, but then you have that one horn, and then a majority of seals are then again with the unicorn. That's a classic Harappan antiquity that the moment you find it, you know that you're in the classical Harappan
Yeah.
period, right? So you've given the alternative perspective. In fact, in my room also there is a replica of a seal with a unicorn. So I want you to just talk to us about the unicorn and what your thoughts are on this.
So, I was mentioning the unicorn to a person who's quite familiar with the Harappan world. Not many people are interested in these worlds, but
Yeah,
he was. But he kept saying it's a two-dimensional image of a bison, because that was an old thesis.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's an old thesis, not a new thesis, because now we have figurines which are cattle-like with a single horn have been found, and scholars have already published those images. So I was quite sure it's not, and they have never used it. They're very particular to show the animal's two horns. They'll always show the bent
Show
head. If you're
it.
doing, yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
tilted head. As I said, their anatomy is fantastic. As an artist, I was quite impressed. So they're always tilting heads and showing the rhino in a particular way. They're showing the buffalo in a particular way. They always want to show you the two bull, this thing. So you see something very interesting about it. They're very aware. They wouldn't do it casually. One, and the unicorn is never shown with a food tray. It is always shown perhaps with something which looks like an incense
On a
burner.
pedestal, there is something,
It is still
an
something in
object.
front of it, but it's not looking down, it's looking up. So
Yeah,
for me, looking up is important, because if fragrance is coming up, you'll smell it like this. So for
yeah,
me, and I'll tell you why that is important, because the material world and the spiritual world, the material world is food which you place on the ground and you look down, and the spiritual world, which is always shown as upar, is shown through incense. And one of the
yeah.
things that Middle East would always export is oud and frankincense and myrrh, which was the Arabian peninsula is famous for incense, which is why there's a big question: what did the Harappans import? And I was like, perhaps incense along with bitumen, because these are raw materials and therefore we'll never find them. And that thought caught my eye. And then the whole idea of control: why should kings control? Okay, is it possible for someone who gives up materialism, moves towards the path of giving up things, becomes the supreme guy? And in India, it's not an impossible idea. We do see the images of the Digambaras, the Buddhas, this idea of even Shiva is someone who walks away. Digambar, he's called Digambar, the one who walks away. And I said the citadel, perhaps, I mean, this is again a thesis, that these are people who are traveling everywhere. They
Yeah.
don't stay in one place. They would stay only during the rainy season. As we know, Chaturmas is and they would perhaps live in those citadels for those temporary times. And this is an idea that people have suggested. There's something religious about it. But then when they talk of religion, they're talking about Hindu temples. They never talk about monasteries in India. They don't have an understanding of viharas, of how derasars, these kind of structures. And unless you understand those, which are very important to India, India really is the home of monastic thought. We are the
Yeah.
I'm saying that, could this proto idea have existed? Is
Yeah.
something It's a proto idea. I mean, why is it not possible? Because you have compared to Mesopotamia, which is so violent and individualistic, India, the trading partner, is very insular, is very institutional, and is not violent. All this
Yeah.
is telling me, and I'm like, okay, if they were dominating, they need a symbol. What symbol would they use? They wouldn't use an animal which is male, female, fertile, violent. They want a different kind of animal, a
Yeah.
animal which is perhaps asexual, perhaps. And there is one image which shows, of kind of a leaf within the unicorn and a leaf outside, and it sounds very. That is the only almost metaphysical image. What is inside is outside. Now these are very big philosophical ideas. Jo andar hai wahi bahar hai, what we call manifestation nowadays.
Manifest.
Everybody uses this word, and I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, this is something all suggesting. So I'm proposing that this was the symbol of the hermit regulator, and this is the hermit regulator. So 80%, and the moment that system collapsed, which is where the classical period comes to an end, the seals disappear, the system disappears, because now you're because the moment regulation goes away, when the regulator does not regulate themselves, what happens? Anarchy starts. And
Hmm.
suddenly you find people competing with each other and trying to be monopolistic. And then you have Central Asian imagery appearing at that. And something is going wrong in the trading practices. You are finding Sumeria collapsing at that time. The demand is going down. Climate change is happening. And
Yeah.
it all was based on trusting the hermit. If you stop trusting the hermit, the system collapses. As we know in
True.
economics, if trust isn't there in the market collapses, anarchy takes place. And that,
Yeah.
if you understand economics, you will understand that anarchy, violence always happens when the regulator loses control. And today also we see in our society, right? If
Yeah.
that regulator loses respect, systems collapse. And I
Yeah.
feel these are to be considered. Climate change, very easy answer. Oh, climate change. It's a politically safe answer. We don't want to deal with anything complicated.
Mhm.
Safe answer, right? Climate change. Ho gaya. But, I'm saying maybe this is also the market collapse, trading collapse, regulatory collapse, end of monastic order, failure of trusting those people who 500 years controlled the show. 500 years is a long time.
Yeah.
500 years is what? 20 generations.
Yeah, yeah. It's a long, long period of time, the mature Harappan period. And I think you also mentioned somewhere about the concept of reward and punishment, which is very integral to not just Harappans, but I think, from the time we've started sedentary lifestyle, the reward and punishment is it goes hand in hand. You know that if you do something, you may get punished for it. It's something which is ingrained, and you don't necessarily have to beat somebody so that the fear is instilled, but you can have those things in your mind. If you do certain thing, you may get a very negative face negative repercussion, which is quite fascinating. And I agree to a certain extent, because archaeologically it becomes very difficult to explain. But if you have to, beyond archaeology, if you have to see other aspects which archaeology cannot help, because in fact even archaeology is a multidisciplinary subject.
Yeah.
And Harappan civilization, we are only able to understand it only because we've had help from other disciplines. So why
Mythology.
not have mythology and literature help in understanding the intangible, and it's a good start. I think I really enjoyed the work. I want to ask, weren't you what were the precautions you took, because you are dealing with archaeological data, and it's not very easy because a lot of information sort of gets missing in the laundry list usually you find in the archaeological report. So what
So
were your experience working with archaeological data?
no, the thing is that there's tons and tons and tons of information out there. There's tons of
Yeah,
information out there. There's harappa.com, which is a very good website, which put
absolutely
together very good
amazing.
work, and I think that's a very commendable work that they have done.
Yeah, yeah,
And I have seen papers. I was in touch with one or two, I had seen a paper which I liked very much, Anshumani Bahata's paper, and then I met Mayank Vahia for something totally different. And then I did realize he has also done work in Indus things. But the thing is, I realized how much of speculation. You see, what happens is archaeology is material based, and therefore, a lot of attention has been given to the technology and the material and the objective evidence.
yeah, yeah,
Interpretation of it is going to enter the realm of sociology and anthropology and philosophy
Yeah.
and economics and politics. And that is where you have to start asking difficult, funny questions, and you have to compare and contrast. And if you study semiotics, they'll always say the easiest way to understand meaning is to compare and contrast. If you compare contrast things, you can understand meaning better. So I compared and contrasted Egyptian, which really didn't interact directly with Harappa, but it was contemporary. And then you have Mesopotamian and Sumerian civilization, not even the Babylonian and the Assyrian. So I had to study all of them. And obviously, you can't study everything, right? There's thousands of scholars writing on cuneiform script and this and that. So you read summaries, you read conclusions, that's why bibliography is there, a long bibliography in my book. There is a lot of acknowledgements of people, disclaimer telling them I'm not a scholar. I'm very clear, this is not the
Yeah.
truth, this is my truth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm all my writings, I never claimed my writings are the truth. I always say it's my truth. I'm giving it to you so that you can think based on your own truth and expand your scope. And I want
Yeah.
people to expand their scope. I want young archaeologists like you to think differently and challenge old ideas. As you said, the path has to be challenged. Can we use Indian ideas like grama, kula,
Yeah,
grama and
exactly.
kula? So grama kula, because I'm familiar with the grama kula system, which is a very foundational Indian system. You have to talk of jati, the gated communities of. There is something jati about it. Were the toilets and latrines that we talk about to keep people inside the walls so that you can do your ablutions inside and not step out? Were they locked up for a period of time? Is that the reason? Because Indians never use latrines after that. I've always wondered, why did the cities just disappear? Because it is obviously not necessary to survive in that area. You have farming growing, you have animal husbandry growing. So people
Yeah.
didn't, people are lived their lives in villages and farms. We just think, oh, urban cities, so everybody would be living in the cities. And I'm like, no, a small portion of the population lived in the cities. Large numbers, the farmers didn't live there. The animal husbandry people.
Passions. Yeah.
And that is something which I'm like, want people to remember that सब लोग city के अंदर नहीं रहते थे.
Yeah.
Because the idea of, you think of Junagadh fort and you think of the Delhi's forts, those big forts, and you think सब लोग अंदर रहते थे. Because, and I'm like, if there's no war, why would I stay inside the fort? These forts were built by merchants to protect their product.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you see that in Dholavira because it's so massive bastions and citadels. And I'm like, of course, that's where shipping is going to take place.
Yeah.
All the wealth is coming here. So they want to protect it because there'll be pirates, there would be thieves, there would be competition, rivals.
Yeah.
So,
And also,
that.
Dholavira was in a very different ecology. Also, the landscape was quite difficult for Dholavira, like people, and it's a port city. But if you go to Haryana and sites in Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, the Harappan sites, you have a walled city or a walled settlement, and then you have satellite settlements around it. Hundreds of them. Like Rakhi Gadi is a classic example. You have Rakhi Gadi. We don't know whether it was walled or not. We haven't found the evidence. But then you have these satellite settlements all around Rakhi Gadi, all around it. And I really, we don't have much time, but the gram, the concept that you mentioned here, the gram rivalry, the village system was actually the core of it rather than the cities. Village was supporting the cities, not the other way around.
Yeah,
I often talk about that culture give rise to civilization, not civilization to culture.
yeah,
It's the other way around. So it's a very, very important point, you've made. Now, to the last question, because we're running out of time, I want to bring back to the core message of the book, which is ahimsa. When I
yeah,
first, when I read the introduction, when I read the title of the book, ahimsa, because we don't have archaeological evidence. We have not found swords. We have not found daggers. Before Sonali, there was not even evidence of it. Like you do find in copper hoards, these hordes and hordes of antenna swords, daggers, and Sonali's excavation is the only example where you find that in a proper archaeological context with the chariots. But that is not a true Harappan site, right? That is also little last phase of Harappan civilization. But now talking about the core of a Harappan civilization, we rarely find any weapons. We do find spears, we do find arrows and all of that, but no weaponry at all. But we do have fortifications, and you do talk about how they the trade and the connection of non-violence and also the monkhood. But there, but to prove it, or to have a more conclusive evidence, we need more, right? So yours is just the beginning of the thought. I think your book is sort of an initiation into a direction. But how would you like, this idea to sort of take its shape? Like it needs more work.
You see, the assumption that humans and that culture and civilization is an outcome of violence is a very
Yeah,
Western way of thinking.
it's a very Western way.
Because
I true, I agree.
you see,
Completely.
let me give you examples. Roman Empire was based on extraction. They would conquer lands and they would extract, which is exactly the model used by the East India Company. They would conquer lands to extract. So the mindset is that powerful people, military people, are meant to extract. The idea that there is, in fact, there are archaeology theorists who say that culture and civilization's difference is civilization trades a lot. Trading happens a lot in civilization, and that is a sign of refinement, because you're not locked yourself in your own little village, but now you are dealing with lapis lazuli from this place, and you want carnelian from Gujarat, and you want shells from the Arabian Sea. So you're opening your mind to a new way of thinking, because trade allows exchange of goods, exchange of ideas, and that is civilization. And trade is always non-violent, and this connection of non-violence and trade, it's a Harappan city is based on economics. It is trading city. It is highly regulated. They're obsessed with measurement. They're obsessed with architecture, perpendicular lines,
Precision. Yeah,
measurements. And
everything.
that
Yeah.
sounds like my Jain friends. All my Jain friends are very good with numbers. They love their geometry. They love those Excel sheets and precision. And I'm like, are you not seeing this? The Jains made friends with the Mughal Empire, with the Sultans of India, with the East India Company, with the Rajas of India, with the governments right now. So I'm like, hey, are you seeing this way of thinking? That there is a mercantile way of thinking which is non-violent, and there is
Yeah.
a military way of thinking which is violent. And
True.
therefore, the mercantile nature of the Harappan cities is linked to the monastic way, is what I want to draw attention to. It is mercantile, it is not military. And if it is mercantile, it should think in terms of renunciation, monkhood, regulatory. And that is only way for 500 years. Of course, people would fight and scream and shout, and there would be negotiations, but there would be negotiations. And you don't have right and wrong concepts. You see, the legislative approach of right and wrong, reward and punishment that you mentioned would be managed by ideas like debit and credit.
Yeah.
Debit
Yeah.
and credit, which is a very mercantile language. And what we call debit and credit today is pap and punya.
Mm.
So pap and
Yeah.
punya comes from a monastic mercantile way of thinking, karma.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
using an Indian model. I'm like, I refuse to use a Western model of Mesopotamia. And this is also because mythology clearly shows Hindu Kush as a barrier. And the, to the west of the Hindu Kush, mythologies have always been different. The Sanoli chariots are very similar to the BMAC chariots, those antenna swords and all that. And I can see something shifting towards the end. There's a shift. You go towards China, you have a different way of thinking, but the subcontinent has always maintained a very different way of thinking, and ahimsa is one of them. Trading
Yeah.
is one of them. Rajamandala later, not in this period, but Rajamandala later. And I want us, it's not coming from, oh, India is great, chauvinism, we are a civilization. No, that's not coming from there. It's just saying that human beings think differently. Everybody
True.
thinks differently. And I don't have to think like Europeans and Middle Eastern people. It is
Yeah.
possible to think differently and give me the respect that I deserve. That,
Yeah.
it is possible
Yeah.
for a culture to evolve
What
differently.
absolutely. I mean, like I can go on talk about Harappans like for hours and hours, and I can add more, and we can have more discussions. But unfortunately, we have come to the end of this soft cover. Wish we could go on. And I could tell you about the how Gujarat Harappans are too Gujarati even today. The
Yeah.
Gujaratis. Yeah, the business
Yeah.
men, the capitalist thinking, the Gujarat Harappans had the same characteristics, whereas the Haryana Harappans probably had the same thinking as the Haryana, the production and the management sort, because the production is happening in Haryana, Punjab because the resources, and also of course the craft and production is happening in Gujarat too. The diversity, and also that they're so linked to landscape, and your thought is quite fascinating, to be honest. And I can sort of go on and on and on, but yeah, maybe next time. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us, and
Thank you.
and for all our viewers, do go and check out this book. This book is fascinating. It's a must read, and yeah, and beautiful illustrations as well. It sort of will open your eyes to a new fresh perspective, which is always needed in archaeological, when you're dealing with the past, which is sort of very archaeological in nature. And maybe it's a beginning of a new thought, or new school of thought. You never know. Hopefully, this will sort of result in some interesting work or papers. And for now, thank you so much once again, and please check out this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.